So, hi, and welcome to this week's episode of APMG Connect. So, in this today's show, Ella's over in the chat, so please let her know your name and the city from where you're joining, okay? Get involved in the chat, put your questions into the panel, and we'll get them over to the panel to answer live during the show. So, today we are talking about how to lead with integrity and how the ISO 37000 framework is going to help you do that. There's a quote I really like from Louis Gerstner. It says, "The real mechanism for corporate governance is the active involvement of the owners." Now, I think that makes perfect sense. So effective governance, I think, is pretty much important to any organization, and demonstrating commitment to your stakeholders is vital. Okay? Good governance is not only builds trust, improves the business performance, and contributes to social and environmental integrity. We have a very experienced panel over on the panel today. So let's jump right in and meet them. So Caroline, welcome. Caroline's best known for her work in training and assessing and applying and developing corporate governance standards, including she's involved with South Africa's King Report as well as ISO 37000. So welcome, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Nigel. It's really lovely to be here, especially with the panel of experts that I'm joining today. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. So Axel, welcome, my friend. Axel is the practice lead for purposeful governance and strategy, and he works with the board of directors, board committees, and executives, and his specialties are in the financial, state-owned enterprise, utilities, SME, and not-for-profit sectors. And I believe he's the founding chair of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute as well. Welcome, Axel.
That's right. Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, and it's my pleasure to be with you.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us, Axel. And our last final guest for today is Annemarie van der Merwe. Annemarie is the executive chair at Fluid Rock Governance, with more than 32 years of practical experience, as a corporate lawyer, company secretary, governance expert, and director in the listed environment, private companies, and public sector. I think Annemarie is a regular presenter of workshops on the duties and responsibilities of directors and company secretaries, and she's been a facilitator for the Institute of Directors for many years now. Welcome, Annemarie.
Thank you. Afternoon, Nigel. Hi, Carolyn, Axel. Great to join you on today's show and really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, no, I think this is going to be an awesome conversation, definitely. So I'd just like to say welcome to our audience who are watching us live at the moment. So let's jump right in and take our first question. And Axel, this question is for you. So what is ISO 37000?
Okay, thank you. So the ISO 37000 is the first international consensus on what good governance is. It was developed over 4 years involving 77 countries in the technical committee and was approved by all members of the International Standards Organization unanimously. And it's now the benchmark against which organizations can assess themselves and that they can use in order to voluntarily apply these standards so that they're able to conform with their own expectations as well as those of regulators or others.
Fantastic. Thanks, Axel. That makes perfect sense. Caroline, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, maybe just a little bit about the uncovering what's inside of ISO 37000. It's really is a revolutionary standard. Just to echo what Axel was saying, and Axel was the co-convener of the working group that put this together, and to bring the different perspectives from around the world and build global consensus for a principle-based standard was not easy to do, and took a number of years to get that right, specifically because we have regulation sitting in stock exchanges, which is a compliance requirement, and what we have in 37000 really is a guidance document and not a compliance requirement per se. So you can't certify an organization on whether they are applying or complying with 37000. But just to lift the hood a little bit, what I really love about 37000 is that it provides conditions for good governance. So essentially saying, look, before you even start applying principles and looking at practices, first of all, you need the conditions for good governance. And those conditions are things like making sure you've got the right governing body structure, you've got the right skills and diversity of thought and thinking and independence of thinking, and then also making sure that you've got integrated governance, that you are able to effectively delegate authority and responsibilities through the organization, if you don't have those simple conditions for good governance, then applying principles on top of that is not really very effective. So I love the idea that it starts with those conditions. Then it has principles of good governance, and then finally, it really is aiming towards the organization being better off as a result of applying the principles in 37,000. And that means that the governing body is aiming to achieve governance outcomes. And like South Africa's King Report, King 4, was the first standard where we had, can you say standard, where you had governance outcomes indicated. What we're indicating here is in 37,000 is governance outcomes. So for the organization, so essentially it's not the governing body achieving the governance outcomes. It's really as a result of the governing bodies applying 37,000, these are the things that the organization can realize, the benefits for the organization. So it is groundbreaking in its approach to governance around the world.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you both, Carolyn and Axel. I think that all makes perfect sense. And I think the interesting part here is that we're not trying to audit against the ISO 37 standard, correct? It's a set of guidelines that we're using to try to implement good governance. Okay,
That's right.
Fantastic. Let's move along to our next question. Our next question is, can you give us a brief overview of the ISO 37 framework? So I think this question is for Carolyn.
Yes, I can. I'll build on the basis of what I was just saying. So we have a set of concentric circles, and anyone that goes and just Googles 37,000 on the internet, you'll have access to this diagram. And this diagram really encapsulates everything that the 37,000 standard is all about. Of course, the devil's in the detail, and the detail is in the standard. But just unpacking the framework itself, at the very core is what's called the foundational governance principle, and that is the purpose of the organization. Maybe just to mention, it's the only principle that actually has two parts, and the two parts are that you can't have an organizational purpose without a comprehensive set of complementary organizational values. You achieve your purpose by applying your values of the organization. So the purpose and values are core and central to this governance standard. Around that, we have the traditional governance, what we call the foundational governance principles. No, is that right, Axel? The foundational the foundational governance principles, and these you can find from any good governance theory. So here you can look at the Bob Tricker, the Bob Garrett, the Mervyn King, the John Carver models around what constitutes the practices of good governance. So that's establishing your strategy, making sure you've got policies that guide the organization in terms of your strategy, to make sure that you are overseeing the organization's activities, and then disclosing as a demonstration of accountability. But I think the one principle in there that is incredibly important is the principle of value generation. So guiding governing bodies on how they should direct and guide their organizations on to generate value beyond just financial value. And then on the outside of the concentric circles, you have the enabling governance principles. And here you have things like, well, to generate value, generating value for stakeholders. So you need stakeholder engagement. You need to have ethical and effective leadership. You need to have effective decision making, and you need data for those decisions. To inform those decisions, you need effective risk governance. So in today's world of impact, risk, and opportunities, you really do need effective risk governance. You need to have social responsibility. That is a key enabler of sustainability, as we know, ESG or sustainable development. And then, of course, really embedded in the standard, in the framework, is this concept of impact or double materiality, really building in sustainability and we call viability and performance over the long term. And those collectively, when applied using effective practices for your organization, will achieve the governance outcomes. Just maybe to say that the guidance doesn't stop with principles. It does delve down into key aspects of practice that really are expected from all sizes and types of organizations, no matter your country, no matter your industry. They're really, those key aspects of practice are, well, internationally agreed as being practices that should be considered in applying the principles. So just maybe opening up the kimono a bit of what's sitting under the hood there. Perhaps Axel would like to add after my fumble.
No fumble at all. Axel, do you have something to add to that?
Well, I think Carolyn exposed it very nicely, and I think that the ISO standards are also known for to be able to certify against them, and that is true for part of them. And collectively, within our technical committee, we have decided that over time we will try and introduce more and more certifiable standards. Because the stakes in which we are living, the stakes of governance and of our organizations are increasing, and many organizations are trying to increase the level of trust and increase their resilience and their performance while the world is accelerating and becoming more or less predictable. So within this, I think it's important to understand that ISO standards, none of the ISO standards are ever trying to replace regulation. So the regulators are expected to do their part. And the work of ISO standards, and the purpose of ISO standards is to enable organizations to comply with these specific regulations in a manner that is internationally agreed to be good practice by a large section of stakeholders. So you have industry, you have academia, you have government, you have non-for-profit, you have consumers, you have labor, all coming together in order to agree on what do we consider good practice that we can then apply in order to meet whatever specific regulations are in a particular country or industry or sector.
Makes sense. Perfect. I think somebody on your side, Axel, is trying to communicate with us. We have this here as well, don't worry. So while we're online, I just want to welcome everybody who's joining. So Amado, welcome from Angola. Excellent. Nice to see you joining. Suchitra, welcome from Bangalore in India. We've got from London. Fantastic. Awesome to have you here. And Finora as well from Abuja. So we've got folks from all over the world here. We've got folks from Ethiopia. So lots of people just joining from everywhere to watch this. So really, really good to have you all here. If you've got any questions for the panel, just put them into the chat and our social team will get them over to the panel to answer during the show. So, and yeah, I think the dog wants to be part of the show. Definitely can't blame them. It is an interesting point. So yeah. All right. Fantastic. So let's move along to our next question now. And our next question is, Carolyn, how was the standard developed and who was actually involved in doing that?
I'm going to look to Axel as well for a little bit of guidance on this. But in terms of how was the standard developed, I'm going to give you an experience as an expert, as participating in the development of the standard. So there's a whole process that we go through that is standardized in ISO. It is a standard development process, and there's various rigorous controls around it. To participate, you have to participate through your national member body. So in South Africa, it's the South African Bureau of Standards. Often they're called Bureaus of Standards. And in that participation, you are elected to be a representative, an expert representative to the International Organization of Standards, ISO. And as that representative, you are representing both your expertise as well as your country. So it's important as a country representative, you make sure that your country's best interests are considered and taken into account in the development of the standard. That process is rigorous, and it has been applied for many, many years. It first started, ISO started after the Second World War by the United Nations. So how was the standard developed? It was developed rigorously using processes, using consensus building, and considering all of the input from all of the experts and country representatives from around the world. Axel mentioned a little bit about who the countries were that were involved. So delegations from China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Australia, We had some observer countries such as New Zealand and let's say in South Africa, in Zimbabwe. Observer countries are really those countries that are watching the progress. They're able to get involved, but they're not able to vote on the decisions. And so it's a different kind of participation. So from around the world, people often ask me, but what about the United States? Because that is one large country, nation, that is using a compliance-based approach to governance. And this is a principle-based approach. And absolutely, the United States was involved in the development of this standard. So they did have a say. I remember clearly one of our first meetings in 2017 in Quebec City in Canada. The United States had a lot to say when we started formulating the base framework of it. But it's not only countries that are involved. Axel did mention that there are these liaison members. So liaison members really are not nations like we have in the United Nations. There are large global representative bodies, and those bodies have consensus building mechanisms in their own right. So here we had organizations such as the OECD, the Organization for Economic and Cooperative Development. We had organizations such as the International Corporate Governance Network, so representation from that. And of course, I was representing a regional national committee, and that was the South African King Committee in the development of the standard. So there were about, I think, Axel, 83 of those liaison organizations that participated. Maybe you can just add a little bit more around the construct within which this working group operated.
Yeah, let us have your thoughts.
Thank you, Nigel. So overall, there were 77 countries involved, of which there were 55 participating countries, and that means that they have the national infrastructure in order to establish a national consensus, which means that they must be able to bring together the different stakeholder groups that I mentioned, from labor, private sector, academia, government, civil society. Bring everybody together in order to establish national consensus, and then they can vote on a particular topic. So those are participating countries. And then you have observing countries who do not have this ability to establish national consensus, but who are observing and can contribute but cannot vote. And then in addition to that, we had 25 liaison organizations, which must be non-profit multinational organizations or working across several jurisdictions in order to be a liaison organization in their own right. The main thing to be clear on is that every country in the world at this point has a national infrastructure for determining standards, and this is often captured in law. And it is recognized that if you apply these standards, you're able to trade better internationally, and you're able to create higher quality at a national level. And there's a clear process for accreditation, for certifying. So there's a whole infrastructure that has been internationally agreed on to facilitate this. And now, for the first time, we have a consensus on what governance is and the role of governing bodies and everybody else in it.
Makes perfect sense. Wonderful. Okay. I think that gives us a really comprehensive idea and view of how these things are actually formed. And there's a lot to it, right? It's not as simple of a couple of people sitting around and saying, well, we think this is what good governance is, right? No, it's very, very much involved. There's a lot of countries involved, lots of different organizational types involved as well. And a consensus has to be reached on the way to approach these things. So thank you both very much for that answer. I think let's move on to our next question. Carolyn, I'm going to start with you on this one and move to Axel. Why is it so important that companies subscribe and implement ISO 37001 or 37000?
So the reason why it's so important is what Axel touched on. It is the first and currently the only international benchmark for what constitutes good governance. And so organizations, companies around the world can subscribe and apply the principles of ISO 37000, and other companies that interact with them, their stakeholders. So it could be supply chain in different countries. It could be your different governing body members trying to nominate and appoint different governing body members, from different countries. And really, it's the whole ecosystem around that company that can understand. And when the organization discloses that it's applying the principles of 37,000, and in that disclosure, it discloses how it's doing that. And when it does that, organization stakeholders can be certain of what they're going to achieve and what can be expected, which are the governance outcomes. So it's very important for companies, now that this exists, to adopt the ISO 37000 so we get a normalization. We all understand this is the benchmark for how organizations should be governed. It's been internationally agreed. Everybody around the world believes that this is how organizations should be governed. It makes no sense then for companies to not consider it when the benefits are so significant of actually applying it. In terms of the implementation is more a case of application. So we are applying the principles of ISO 37000, and we'll talk a little bit about supporting standards. So part of the process is, first of all, for the technical committee that was working on this, to make sure that the standard is accurate, it's got global consensus, and it's published. And then the next point, the very next activity of these experts, was to make sure that we're around it. And the supporting standards really are looking to the assessment and providing indicators of good governance so that stakeholders can go, if you are applying, you can't be certified that you're applying, but these are indicators that indicate certainly that you are getting the results. Or this is the maturity model indicating that you are applying your minds in terms of continually improving to achieve the governance outcomes. So that's just a whistle stop, Nigel, around this, answering this question.
Perfect. Fantastic. Thank you, Carolyn. Axel, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, one of the things that people, a lot of people think that there is a lot of guidance on governance already. So because there are codes in many countries and many institutes of governance have developed their own guidance on these topics. There is a regulation, so the central banks and the FIUs in the world have their regulations, and so there's material out there. And yet, when you look at it, that regulation is necessary, but it is not sufficient in order to enable organizations to deal with the realities of practical organizational life. And so the big benefit that you receive by looking at an ISO system is that's an integrated approach, so that you have both the governance elements for what the boards and the others involved in governance are doing, as well as management and how that complements it. So the management systems that go with it. So for example, a compliance management system, a whistleblowing management system, a risk management system, all these things you practically need in organizational life. And now you have coherent language that integrates it. So that's number one. And the second aspect, which I think is also very important, is that the world literally is changing very rapidly at the moment. And there are new dimensions that organizational stakeholders are expecting organizations to address. So Carolyn spoke about the value generation, for example. So defining what these values are that the organization is meant to be producing, I think is very critical. And so at the moment, there literally is not that much guidance for governing bodies for, well, what do you contribute to that? We know from the management side as well that that is a topic that they're very much preoccupied with. But what is the role of the governing body and the others involved in governance, and how do these things play together? So the second aspect is the substance of governance is evolving very rapidly at the moment. And this standard is at the forefront, at the cutting edge of exactly what is happening right now.
Axel, that's really, really interesting what you've just said there. I think what I like about it is nobody generally thinks about governance delivering and providing value, right? People, in organizations generally think about governance in terms of, oh no, this is something we have to do in terms to comply to this or to, prove that we're doing that or whatever. But having the ability to provide value by actually having governance in place and doing it properly makes all the difference. So I think that that's a really, really interesting point that's been, and it's good to hear that 37,000 is actually the cutting edge of this and can lead to adaptability in the way that we govern organizations. Carolyn, you wanted to add something?
Yes, thanks, Nigel. On that point, just the difference between governance and compliance, it's so misunderstood. Governance is about putting the oil on the wheels, really, to drive the organization to be agile and innovative. If it feels like red tape, you really are talking more about compliance. So we do tend to confuse the two. Now, you can't have governance without compliance, because compliance really sets the basic social norm of what good looks like. And beyond that, what we want to do is we want to do our best. And doing your best is really what these governance principles allow us to do.
Thanks, Caroline. That's you eloquently described what I was saying rather poorly. Yeah. That in fact, you're quite right. Governance and compliance are two different things entirely, and often misunderstood. I think if we had $1 for every time we've had somebody refer to governance when they actually meant compliance, we'd probably be quite wealthy by now. But I just wanted to give a shout out to all the people that are watching from around the world again quickly, because we have so many folks online at the moment. I think, Adam, thanks for joining from Southampton. Yes, maybe not quite as exotic as some of the other locations, but nothing wrong with it. And Tombi, we've got joining from the Eastern Cape. That's really, really great. We've got people from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yeah, welcome, Tatiana. It's great to have you here. And we've got some folks here from the Cayman Islands as well. Okay. So people from all over the planet at the moment are very interested in this topic. So really good to see. So obviously it's striking in chord in a lot of people's minds right now. Okay, I think let's move on to our next question, because we have quite a few questions to get through. This question is for you, Anna-Marie. Could you tell us a little bit about the ISO 37000 course?
Oh, Nigel, I couldn't wait to tell you about it. I was like sitting on pins and needles here. They normally, we can't say anymore that ISO is hot off the press, because it's been here now for a while. But I can say this afternoon that I'm hot out of the steam room, hot out of the exam room, because I'm probably one of the latest individuals out there to have done the exam and have been kind of now officially ISO 37000 certified. Thank you. So I can now speak with some level of authority. Really, the course, let me say this first, I haven't written exams in a long time or done courses like this. I was like quite a bit concerned and hesitant to doing it. Felt like I was going back to school to some extent and not knowing what to expect. But the way Carolyn explains in very simple, basic terms, the course really is made up of short videos that every module, about 3 minutes, it's nothing long, it's 3 minutes of every module, where Carolyn will give you some input. You've got a manual, about 100-page manual that kind of gives more meat. And then, the standard itself, I don't know who's looked at it on the call, but it's about a 35-page document. It's not a encyclopedia. It's quite manageable. And what the course really does, I think, and I felt, was that it helped to navigate me. It's not trying to make me be able to recite word for word what's said in the 35 pages. But what it does do is to help you understand how ISO 37000 is put together, the thinking behind it, what are the fundamental concepts, and how do you maneuver through that material, in a practical way. So from that perspective, I really found it very valuable. As you said earlier on, I've been in this industry for many, many years. And even after, 30 years, 3 decades, I cannot say that I know it all. And I was definitely reminded of that when I went through this course. So it was really, for me, a very good refresher and learning new things. And, if you, for example, Axel made the point, many countries have their own governance codes. We have in South Africa the King Code. But what was good about doing this as well is kind of highlighted for me and even though ISO is very much aligned with the thinking of King around outcomes and principles, and recommended practices, there were some real interesting differences. Carolyn referred to value generation, while in King 4 we talk about value creation. There were some really, really interesting differences between ISO and King 4, which I really thought was well thought through, and I could understand where that was coming from. So it does give you a broader perspective. And then finally, maybe to make the point that I think Carolyn and Axel has made, to say this is where the world is moving to. And, to do this course, to just get yourself, you're going to have to still work with this a lot to really, get, I think, to grips with it. But the starting point is definitely to do this course and to then get that. It gives you an international certification. You then, and I'm still waiting for my, what do you call that, digital badge, digital badge, which you can put on your LinkedIn profile. So I'm looking forward to being able to do that maybe in the next day or two. But it just, it really, if for anybody whose heart is into companies doing good, believing doing good is good business, that it's absolutely for them to familiarize themselves with the content. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anna-Marie. And you've probably noticed that while Anna-Marie was talking, there was a little QR code on screen. You can go back at any time in the recording and scan that. That'll take you directly to the ISO 37000 course on the Fluid Rock website. So please go ahead and do that. It'll give you all the information you need about the course. So go ahead and sign up, is the word I would say. All right, let's move along, because I can see the live questions are stacking up here as well. So we've got quite a few to get through. The next question that I'm going to ask, I'm going to come to you first, Carolyn, and then to you, Anna-Marie. Who would actually benefit from attending this course?
Interesting question, because most of the governance courses are geared for directors, non-executive and executive directors. There are also fewer courses for trustees, which is a slightly different flavor of a director, and various other that very senior governing body members. What many of the courses don't do is actually satisfy the requirements of all those involved in the governance of an organization. So it's not only the governing body members themselves. It is the executive. So in the dual board system, it's both the non-executive and the executives, the supervisory and the management boards. But it's also those that support the executives. It's also those that are involved in the company secretarial work, so supporting the governing body themselves through administrative, but also governance expertise. Then you have the discipline-specific governance areas. So people who specialize in IT governance, which was a background of mine, you really are guided towards IT governance courses, which sounds more like IT management than governance. And then you have the risk management courses that talks about governance as well. But ISO 37000 talks to all of those roles. It also helps the stakeholders that are looking to these governing bodies and trying to understand how these governing bodies should be governing. And it also talks to them. So it really is a broad brush around who should be attending and who would benefit. It's anyone who is involved in either assessing, reviewing, impacted by the governance of an organization, let alone those people who are actually involved in governing. So yes, it really is a broad spectrum, and purposefully what we've done is we've taken any kind of jargon, buzzwords out of it, because we needed to make it a standard for all. And I think that's something that happened in the technical committee that was behind it, of which Axel is now the co-chair. Or vice chair, I think you're called. And on that, what that technical committee did was, when we started this work of the governance of organizations, the first thing they did was an established a terminology working group or a terminology group. That terminology group makes sure that whenever we talk about governance, we're using the same language. We don't want to end up with what's happening now with the international sustainability reporting standards, where even the number of employees is different, defined differently for every standard. We need to make sure that all the standards use the same terminology and definitions, because we are trying to standardize the discipline of governance for all the governance roles.
Makes sense. Yeah, I agree with you. And it's so critical to be speaking a common language. If you can't do that, it doesn't work. I think, Anna-Marie, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think Nigel, I want to really kind of just carry on where Carolyn has just ended by saying, to me, it's actually everyone. To keep my answer short, everyone. We kind of grew up with ISO, and they were very what's the right word, industry or discipline specific, like risk or safety or building or those things. Well, this is, I think, a very unique one in that it touches on every aspect of an organization. And as I mentioned, because the course is not it's not like a doctorate that you're writing. It's high level, just helping you understand the concepts, helping you understand how it fits into the bigger picture. I do believe that absolutely every person would get value from this. It's also for those that who actually do the course, or they really commit to ISO, for them to be able to really get the buy-in and commitment from all levels in their organizations. I can't think of a better way than arranging for them to do this course. They're just going to get value from it. You can do it in a day or two if you read up ISO and you do the course and you do the exam. It's not a year commitment. So it's structured in a way that it's user-friendly, that you can do it, you can get a proper feel for it. And those that then want to kind of, interrogate and get deeper into aspects of it, there's references in there and ways for them to do it. Those that just said, all right, now I have a good understanding for what ISO is and what the language, the international governance language is, absolutely would benefit from this course. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
I'm very excited about the course.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you very much, both. I think, we've got so many questions stacking up now. I think let's move along rapidly. The next question is what can people expect to learn when they attend this? So I think, Carolyn, if you can answer this briefly, then we can move on to some of the live questions in a minute.
Anyone can read the standard. You purchase the standard. It's an ISO standard, and it's currently sitting behind a paywall. You can go to your national member body. It will be cheaper because it'll be in your currency. But what the course does and what you can learn is why the principles were developed the way they were. What is it intending to achieve? And you get the behind the scenes. And whenever you get the story behind the standard, you are better able to apply and understand, and you get better buy-in for the standard. So what do you learn? Yes, you learn all about you get taken through the standard, but you get the story behind the standard as well.
Okay. Perfect. That makes 100% sense to me. And I think it's so important. Yes, you can all buy the standard and we can all go out and read the standard, but can we actually understand how to apply the standard? And I think that's where the course is going to help you. It's going to help you to articulate within your organization as well as understand it yourself a little bit better. All right, let's move along quickly to the next question, if you don't mind. And Anna-Marie, I'm going to come to you for this question. Why is it important for you as an individual, and what does it mean for your career?
If you're passionate like me just about sustainable development and good governance and, the interconnectivity between society and business and corporate, etc., it's a no-brainer that, you have to do this. There's just, for me, no argument about it. But as we are wanting to believe, and I absolutely do believe, if you see what is happening around us, that this is the way the world is going. And it doesn't matter in what country you are, more and more small, we operate in a small village, and we're going to have cross-border funding, and transactions and M&As we do. And to be able to speak that language then is going to stand you in very, very good stead. So to have this course and certification on your CV, as I've alluded to earlier, and have that badge on your LinkedIn profile, I definitely should be, for anyone today in today's world, should be a plus. I would keep it short, Nigel.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, Anne-Marie. Thanks. Yeah, I agree. The digital badge is such an important thing nowadays. I mean, the days of employers expecting you to print a paper certificate, photocopy it, and attach it to your resume are over. Yeah. Nowadays, digital badges that are verifiable, are out there, delivered by trusted sources like Credly. These digital badges have a lot more meaning and can be attached to your profile on social media and are verifiable by employers. Not only that, but anybody can take a look at it and say this person has actually achieved this, and it means something to them. So very important. Go through the course, write the exam, earn your digital credential, share it out to your network, and that's the way we understand how this works. All right, let's move on quickly to the next question. Caroline, I'm going to come to you for this one. How will having qualified folks in your organization help you to apply ISO 37000?
I think we've touched on it. It's the language. Having a common set of language, a common set of tools in terminology and definitions to understand each other. When we go to school and we learn about geography, it's not only about geography, it's a language that goes with geography. Or history, it's a language that goes with history. There's a language that needs to go with the governance of an organization. And if that language is misinterpreted between people, like we've just spoken about governance and compliance, we get these misinterpretations lead to stumbles, and we don't have the oil on the wheels. So we absolutely need to have everyone at some level, at the same level of understanding about what is this terminology, what does it mean, because we are very pro in the ISO standard setting side of things with governance, integrated governance. And that means yes, governance does happen in the governing body, but it happens throughout the organization as a consequence of the governing body's activities. And we call that integrated governance. And that's why one of the conditions is effective delegation of authority and responsibilities. So qualified people allows you to make sure that it's embedded properly. You've got the right thinking, you've got the same understanding. And certainly if you've got the qualification, it means that you've got the background, you've got the story behind it as well. It's not just at face value as if you're just reading the standard.
Makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Thanks, Caroline. Okay, we can see the questions are stacking up here. So I've got a question for Axel next. Axel, this question is for you. Is this course applicable to certain regions in the world, or is it global?
I think it's global. So it is framed in a way that it is global. So it is not referring to national requirements, other than maybe by way of an example. So the overall approach is to be international across industry, across sectors, and to focus on the common principles of what good governance is about, because those are the same across. And when we develop the standard, we took a lot of care in order to test it against the most diverse and extreme forms of different governing systems, because there are different ways that you can implement things. And so we're pretty sure that we've covered the spectrum as it was. And I think I have not come across anything that is not yet covered.
Thanks, Axel. I think this is a common misunderstanding, right? That, we do things differently here, so your standard couldn't possibly work. No, that's not true at all. There are different ways of governing. There are extreme, as you say, mechanisms in place, but a common standard still allows you to speak the same language. Okay? Even if other sections of it are not applicable to the way you may be doing it, you might want to rethink the way you're doing it. Could be a possible novel idea.
Yes, and can I expand with just one thing, Nigel? Is that it is not only the processes that are important and that are simplified by having that shared understanding. It is the second aspect that really has moved. This is substance of governance. So the kind of topics that need to take into account. And so if governing bodies, for example, are not there only to manage risk, but also to govern risk. Well, what does that practically mean? So what are the actual outputs, the actual deliverables by a governing body, and how should it go about it? Or, for example, if you were think about in integrated manners relating to the resources, the inputs that you're utilizing to generate value, and you want to make sure that your use of them is sustainable and that you're actually creating the value, how do you literally go about it? So it is really not a straightforward answer that governing bodies need to grapple with. And that is why these topics are in every boardroom every time they meet now, because it is new material at higher risks, at greater complexity that needs to be integrated. And so having something that simplifies it and says, well, this is the international consensus on this topic at this moment. And I know that it will be updated once it has moved sufficiently. That gives you the reliability of the system, that it is current and it is applicable.
Totally agree. Axel, I'm going to stay with you for the next question as well. Just with it being an international standard, which countries are actually leading on the implementation? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, well, there were 55 countries that had national member bodies, national mirror committees. And so I think those are the countries that understand and already have the largest commitment ab initio, as it were. And so you will find that the way it works is that anybody can use the standard independently of whether or not it has been adopted as a national standard. The second thing you will find is that those countries that have invested most in generating a national consensus about it are the most likely to use it, to adopt these standards as national standards in their national quality infrastructure. And so the map is on the website, but basically it is spread around the world. That it is the largest number of countries involved in governance, guidance, preparation ever assembled so far.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. that is really phenomenal. Having so many countries involved, I think it just makes sense, and it gives it that stamp that this is really something that you all should be looking at. Okay. If you're involved in governance at all, you really should be looking at 37,000. Okay. Thank you, Axel. Last question, Caroline. I'm going to come to you before we take some of our live questions. Are there any new developments related to 37,000 you want to share? And I think, Axel, you might also want to share. I think you mentioned earlier there were some new standards that are on the way. Caroline, can you elaborate a bit before we move to Axel?
Thank you. Yes. So I'm a co-convener of the development of the governance maturity model for ISO 37,000. And I give you a little bit about that. It's going to be published probably early next year, called ISO 37004. It considers not just your application of print, whether you have a policy or an audit committee, or the tick the box ticking. It looks at three aspects of governance maturity. It says, what is the attitude and behavior of the governing body itself towards governance? Look at the lowest level of learning is the ability to recall. I stumbled on it, the ability to recall your governance principles. And more than that, do you actually understand it, which is what the course is helping you to do, is understand, as opposed to just recall. So that governance aspect is really very important. The maturity of an organization depends on that governance behavior. Good governance needs good behavior. Then we look at it is the efficiency of governance. And that's, if you have documentation, it certainly makes communication of governance activities a lot more efficient. And then there's the effectiveness, is what we were speaking about, is what practices are you using to apply those governance principles, and are they appropriate for your organization? In fact, we look at the applicability or appropriateness of all of those aspects for the organization. Because having documentation when you're a three-man organization maybe just isn't appropriate. Everybody can shout to everybody else around the room. So we do look at appropriateness as one of the aspects of governance maturity. So we talk about, almost this is like a balance sheet of governance. Is it, what is the potential for this organization to be well governed over time? How are you maturing? But it certainly maybe there's a better mechanism to give you an indication of governance in a point of time. And that's really what Axel's working group is working on.
Okay, fantastic. Axel, do you want to share a little bit about what the working group is doing and elaborate a little?
Yeah. So at the moment, the focus is on topics related to decision making. And so for that, you need indicators and governing bodies and all involved in governance or governing groups need to understand how to deliberate about different decisions. And so therefore, what are the right indicators for them to use and how to construct indicators in order to inform their decision making appropriately. So just a little example, for example, so you as a governing body, you're really mostly concerned with the outcomes and the impact that the organization is generating. So what is changing as a result of the work of this organization, of your organization or your partners? And what of that change can you attribute to your organization? And so if you're using, for example, output indicators, so measures of activities, that is not really the best measure to measure the outcomes or the impact. But in practice, this is the kind of mixing that is currently going on, and it's leading to very suboptimal decision making. So what we are working on, therefore, is developing an international agreement about what are indicators, how are they defined, how do you develop them, how should you use them. And then building on that, we will work on measuring effective governance. So it's a whole set of topics within the governance domain. And then part of the integration is also within the integrating the management aspects of it. So here, the foundational standard is 37001, which is compliance management systems. And then linking with that, you have anti-bribery, you have whistleblowing, you have new standards being developed around investigations and many other topics. So all of this is basically also driven by the demand of the members and the national communities. So as in all ISO standards, it is a voluntary system developed by users to agree internationally, this is what we mean, and this is what good practice is for us, the users. And so therefore, it's an emphasis on practicality, it's an emphasis on currency, and there's basically more to come. You know, we are in the beginning of a field that is accelerating in speed and in complexity. And so where simplification, integration, consensus building is the call of the day.
It's the call of the day. And not only that, but the way in which you are going to measure all of this, Kat, that is being the most critical part of this. I think defining some international standards around measurement, how you would measure it, how would you define the correct KPIs, and the correct indicators, and of course, how you would apply them. I think that's really important. Okay? It'll help a lot of people. Okay, we've got a couple of live questions that have come in. So I think let's go straight to those. The first one is, panelists, if you want to answer, just put your hands up. The first question is ISO 37000 an extended version of ISO 14000? I'm going to jump in. Caroline won that one. So
I would love to say yes. So 14,000 is our, and let me get this right, it's an environmental management system standard. 14,000 is the management aspects, but the direction setting, the guidance from the governing body, a strategic level, really comes from the very highest level. And in 14,000, we talk about top management. And that was really problematic because top management means the very highest level of management. But if you look at it from the top down, through the shareholders and stakeholders and governing body, really it starts with the accountability for to the organization starts with the governing body. So it is an extended version of 14,000, but it's the top level. It's the very strategic level of which environmental matters is a key aspect of sustainability. And that comes through in two governance principles in ISO 37000. So it's very much embedded, like 26,000 on social responsibility. I just want to stop on 38,500, which is an IT governance standard. And IT governance standard 38,500 is having to be redeveloped because it is the governance of a specific discipline. And we know what governance is now. It's ISO 37,000. So how do you govern a specific discipline? So we'd see the same is going to happen with risk. It's a discipline. How do you govern risk? So yes, all of these things, and Axel's the technical committee is working to pull these together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Caroline. Okay, let's move on to the next question. This is an interesting question. How can municipalities be encouraged to integrate ISO 37,000 requirements to improve their governance ethos? I think this is an Anna-Marie question. I'm looking at Anna-Marie.
I was like hoping Caroline was going to put a hand up there. Thank you, Caroline. No, I'm joking. I was looking at that question because ultimately, and I sort of assume, let's just talk South African context right now. We know we've got many challenges from a governance and perspective in all levels of our sort of community and society, but municipalities in particular have really been under the spotlight. And we have in South Africa the King Report. King does talk to governance generally. It does talk to, specifically as a supplement on municipalities as well. So you already have a South African framework for municipalities. And I think what happens with ISO is that ISO will just help you. And in fact, I would start with municipality leadership. And I wanted to make that point now using the word leadership. Nigel, you quoted at the start, the active involvement of owners. And although, the word owners give me a bit of a little bit of a, it's for me, it's the really active involvement of leadership, of everyone in the organization. And I think ISO, if you use ISO correctly, you can get the buy-in from leadership in the organization, those that need you, whose support and commitment and involvement you need, that then can kind of form the basis of what you do from a King perspective as well. I think there's a lot of synergy. Caroline did a great job in writing a paper on the kind of comparison between King and ISO. And I think if you look at that document, it will be on the website of the Institute of Directors as well. Look at that document, but then kind of use ISO 37,000 to give the broader framework to your leadership, and then fill in, some of the practicalities and, I don't want to say gaps, but some of the areas with the more country-specific codes, such as the King Code. I think that would be, Caroline, I don't know whether you want to elaborate on that.
All good, I think. I think that was really sound advice, Anna-Marie. Thank you. So let's move on to our next question. And the next question is, how do ISO 37000 and ISO 38500 in IT governance articulate or integrate with one another? This is an interesting one. Panelists?
That's a Caroline question.
Yes,
it's a Caroline and Axel.
I did start answering it, but really, so I'd like Axel to carry on because Axel's working on how are all these standards working together. Okay,
Axel, let's hear how this happens.
Well, I think Caroline already explained the most of the substance to it. But here's one aspect of it, which is also useful for understanding how things fit together, is that in the development of 38,500, now that there is a international consensus on governance, 38,500 is taking 37,000. I'm sorry for all the numbers, but it's taking the governance standard as normative. That means everything it says applies, and it is building on top of it. And so having that consistency, that coherence, and reading things and applying things in unison, I think is the one of the big messages of it. Then there are little technicalities about some of the substance aspects that have evolved. But I think the key link in these kind of topics is, as Caroline was mentioning, is the determination of the overall policies. So in most of the management system standards, these policies are being developed somewhere top management, and then in the explanation of top management, it is clear that can also refer to governing body or to boards or something. So now all those topic has been clarified, and how are these policies and these direction being established? Well, now 37,000 will give you that answer. So you link from one to the other, depending on where your emphasis is and what you need to do and who's involved in it.
Makes sense. Perfect. Makes sense, Axel. Thanks for the answer there. Okay, let's move on. I think this is going to be our last live question, and it's going to be for Axel, I think, this one. That is there any KPI to measure the efficiency of the governance in an organization? Apologies for the poor spelling there. Axel, do you want to take that one?
Well, it's a big topic.
It is.
But the short answer is that we are working on it.
Okay.
It is, it's frequently most of the things, so there is no shortage of things that people use as indicators. But as I was saying before, is many of those indicators are process elements. And part of it is, so you have to say, okay, how many board meetings do we have? Do people attend the board meetings? What is the diversity on the boards? All those things. Those are important inputs and elements of governance, but they don't really tell you really about the effectiveness or the efficacy of the governance. And so to do that, you then have to ask, it's a little bit like with a motor car, where the governance is the equivalent of the steering of the car, the navigation system. But you need other things to it. You need wheels, you need bonnets, you need many other things involved in a car. And so the effectiveness of the whole car is ensuring that you have the navigation system and ensuring that you have the rest of the car that is appropriate for the destination that you have set. So, and that you're actually you're arriving there. But to measure then the actual effectiveness of the governance output itself. So are we actively, successfully determining the direction? Are we actively and successfully overseeing and correcting anything? And are we accounting for this? And what is changing as a result of that in terms of substance as opposed to process elements? So that is the call that is currently coming from members and international liaison organizations to say we want to move beyond measures of input and process to measures of outcome and effectiveness. And that is what the world is currently spending a lot of time on.
That makes perfect sense. And unfortunately, everybody, we have run out of time for today's questions. We're in fact a bit over time. Apologies for that. So I just wanted to take the moment to say thank you so much to our audience for submitting a bunch of live questions and all of the interaction that we've had online. And a special thanks to our three panelists. So I'd just like to walk around the panel and get your closing comments. Carolyn, I'm going to start with you. What were your thoughts on today's questions and show?
Brilliant. I always love working with yourself, Nigel. Thank you. And Axel and Anna-Marie. It's lovely to have some great thought leaders to hear their insights. Maybe one thing, the benefit of ISO 37000 course that wasn't mentioned was it's completely self-paced and online. And there are not many courses like that. And I think that's, in today's world, really beneficial. So maybe just to a shout out to Fluid Rock for the course. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think having this video element to it as well really makes a difference. It makes life, it just spices up the course. It gives it some body, and your explanations are wonderful. So thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Axel, what are your closing remarks?
Yeah. Well, the technical committee 309, so that where we're working together also with Carolyn in that, is the place where we establish international consensus on governance that contributes to sustainable development. And at present, it is very clear that we are not on a sustainable path yet, and that we need all organizations to play their part across the different sectors and across all the members in the organizations and their stakeholders. And so having a shared language, having a shared understanding, and having actually also access to practical tools and elements for conducting the work of governance, I think that is the major benefit that this course and the standards and the set is producing. So my main message is the world needs you, and we need good governance.
That's a fantastic message, Axel. I love it. Thank you. Anna-Marie, your closing remarks, please.
Nigel, yeah, if I can just take up where Axel just left, is to say I fully agree with him. We cannot in today's world afford organizations that are not responsible stewards, that are not effective in their performance, and that are not ethical in their behavior. It's a no-brainer. We need it. We need everybody on board. And here we for the first time have an international platform from which to do it. I think, just is an absolutely wonderful thing to be part of. And I would definitely encourage everyone today and in their circle of influence to get everybody to do this course. It really is. And if you want any more information on it, you can also email us on trainme at Fluid Rock Governance, but I'm sure, Nigel, you will also share that information. It's trainme at fluidrockgovernance.com. And
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thanks, Carolyn, Nigel, Axel. I've really enjoyed the session with you.
Me too. Been a fantastic session. Thank you all very, very much. Okay, so over on our website, everybody, you can go and actually search for the answers to over 2,000 questions now. It's really, really a phenomenal bank of resources for you to have a look at. Okay, there are literally over 220 experts now from around the world that will give you their answers to your questions. So please go over there, take a look. And don't forget, you can also listen to the audio versions of the shows on your preferred podcast platform. And please take a moment to like, comment, and share and subscribe. It really doesn't cost you anything, but it helps folks discover our content, and there's a lot of valuable content there to be had. Okay, looking forward now, we've got an action-packed week again coming up this week and next week. Friday the 16th, we are on Level Up again. This time we're talking about how to become a cybersecurity professional. And on Monday the 19th at 8 a.m. GMT, we're looking at how to engage stakeholders. Friday the 23rd at 2 p.m. GMT, we're looking at how to become a trainer. That should be a very interesting episode. So all of those details are on apmginternational.com. So please subscribe, join us on the next show, and thank you very much for watching.